Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Clear Values podcast. Today, it is my pleasure to be speaking with Jim Ferrell. Jim is a best-selling author and founder of Withy Leadership. Prior to founding Withy, Jim was a long-time managing partner of the Arbinger Institute. He has written multiple blockbuster books, including the original versions of Leadership and Self-Deception and The Anatomy of Peace, and his publications have sold millions of copies around the world. Jim has degrees in economics and philosophy and is a graduate of Yale Law School. Over his nearly 3 decades as a thought leader, working with corporate and governmental leaders, he has developed a reputation as one of the world's great innovators in the areas of leadership, culture change, conflict resolution, communication, and interpersonal connection. Jim, welcome to the Real Clear Values podcast.
Great being with you, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. And because the book is relatively hot off the press, isn't it? You've been extremely busy. So I'm really grateful for you making the time to do
pleasure.
this.
Yeah, for sure.
So in terms of the book, as read out there from the biography, there's you've got quite a storied career. And those books, both Leadership and Self-Deception, are on my bookshelf. Leadership and Self-Deception and The Anatomy of Peace. The Anatomy of Peace was actually the one that I read first, even though that was published later than Leadership and Self-Deception, and that had a profound impact on me. And you didn't publish it. Well, you didn't use your name to publish it, did you? You used the Arbinger Institute name. So
that's right.
So you were hidden in that respect as the author of that book, but it had a profound impact on me. So you've already achieved a lot of success in this domain, and you've written this other book here, You and We, which we'll talk about now. Mm-hmm. And this is interesting because the way that you tell a story in the book, in terms of this coming about, is a realization that you have when you're on a plane journey, and it involves your thinking on Martin Buber. So tell us about that. What was this realization that you had in relation to the work of Martin Buber, and how did it inspire the book?
Yeah, so Buber, I've been familiar with Buber's work for years. In fact, I'd cited him like numerous times. Because I thought I understood him, but it turns out I only sort of had read him on the surface. In fact, I hadn't really ever studied him hardly. I just encountered his key terminology, like, we can be, I, it, he calls it, or I, you, or I, thou. And those ways of talking just mapped really cleanly onto the work I was doing for years and years and years. So I just thought Buber was saying the same thing that I'd always been saying. And it was on a flight to Germany now a number of years ago. Yeah, I actually had a couple of his books. One of them was actually this very book, this copy of this book. This is his seminal work, a little book, but packs a massive impact, called I and Thou. And this was the copy I had. And I was just reading that other book and this book. I thought, okay, I'm going to dive into Buber. When I was into this one, only a few pages, I read a paragraph which totally stopped me, because the implications, if I was understanding what he was saying, was that I totally misunderstood his point all of those years, that he actually was saying something different than what I had always been saying. Didn't mean that what I had been saying was wrong or bad. It's just that he was up to something different, and in some ways more, and certainly in many ways deeper than I had been. So essentially, the point was this. I had thought what Buber had been saying was that we can see people as people or as objects. That's pretty clean. Well, I, it, if I'm I, it, I'm seeing people as objects. If I'm I, you, or I, thou, I'm seeing others as people. And that had been a large part of my work up till that point in my prior, work with the Arbinger Institute. It's a great work. But when I, in fact, I'll read you the passage. I'll read you the very thing that rocked me, and you'll see why I think it stopped me short. So he said this. So remember, my thinking was, okay, if I see someone as an object, that's I, it. If I see someone as a person, that's I, you. And this is what I read. He writes, I perceive something. I am sensible of something. I imagine something. I will something. I feel something. I think something. And I would say, I see something. That fits within the same his same points. And then he continues, he says, this and the like together establish the realm of it. I'm like, wait a second. Thinking something, saying something, perceiving something, feeling something, that's the realm of I, it. I mean, come on, that did not map at all from what I'd always been thinking. And that caused me, first it stopped me short. I thought, wait a second, there's something I'm not understanding about his work. And so I started to dive in and study everything about what he was saying. And it was quite a fascinating journey. And I did discover that, yeah, he was up to something entirely different, not entirely different, it's connected, but he was doing something different and at a different level than I had been up to for years. Um, and it was exhilarating actually to discover what that is. And it really, that was the genesis for this book, You and We, that emerged out of, now, I mean, years then following that. I'm going to say like 5 years of deep dive study in application, in this whole area. And yeah, what emerged was, yeah, what now is this book, You and We, which,
Yeah.
by the way, is sort of a takeoff. I mean, Buber is I and thou, and
Mm.
my latest book is You and We. It sort of has this sort of philosophical connection to it out of his work, I would say.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's no small thing to take a thinker as sophisticated and rich
Mm.
as Buber and simplify him into something
Yeah,
that can be used in a practical sense. I mean, good grief, philosophers spend their entire lives studying these great thinkers and still disagreeing on what's actually meant, much less being able to
yeah,
produce something that's valuable in terms of practical application. So,
yeah. Agreed. I think that is the challenge, and Buber, like others who are sophisticated thinkers, it's rough at times when you dive in because you think
mm,
you understand what they're saying, but they're actually, I mean, you've got to really
yeah.
wrestle it to
Yeah.
understand the points. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the opening quotes that you include in the book from Buber at the very beginning of the book is, ironically, in terms of, well, maybe not ironically, but in terms of where it's positioned. But at the very beginning of the book, you quote Buber saying, "In the beginning is relation,"
Yeah.
and that's interesting. So in the beginning is relation. So
Right.
is that just between me and another person, or is there something else going on there? Is that the relationship with me and everything, like me and myself, how I feel about myself, how I see the world? Is it what's going on there? Because I think it's one of those things that's only about 5 words long, but I think there's a lot to unpack just from
Yeah,
that.
there's so much to unpack there, isn't there? So,
Yeah.
so look, I would say there's a potential confusion here, and I tried to explain this in You and We, but um, when I use the word relation, I'm actually making a different point than relationship, and so's Buber. Okay, so relation, I'll use an analogy. Let's think about gravity for a moment. So most of us, I don't know about you, but I haven't thought about gravity today until this very moment. But it's affected me every moment of the day, even though I haven't been thinking about it. Gravity is just a reality that we live within. Well, relation is like that too. We live in a relational reality. It's just the way that it is. It's inescapable. There is no independent, separatist place. Everything's in relation. So that includes me with other people. It includes me and other things as well. Everything is in relation, and now inside of that relational reality is we can develop relationships with different people, for example, and that's a very specific, and that comes really sort of, it's a choice. We choose to enter into relationships in one way or another. There is no choice in relation. It's ontological. It's just a reality. It's the way that it is. And and part of the point of You and We is, um, it's like we're not thinking about relation. We don't get that. So, but when you do see that, when you see that actually everything's relational by, and just ontologically, foundationally, it's like turning a dial on understanding, um, away from a very, at least in the West in particular, very individualistic sort of way that we've all grown up, the way we actually encounter and think about experience and ourselves, very individualistic ways. You turn the dial, and all of a sudden it's like, there's a whole new reality that I haven't actually been alive to, that has massive practical implications. So whether that's personal implications and implications in home and family life, whether it's corporate implications in business, whether it's societal implications, they're huge. So You and We is a dive into that, into those applications in those various spheres, whether it's home, personal life, work life, social life, political life for that matter. They all are living, breathing manifestations of this thing we're not thinking about and realizing it, namely relation. And so to be able to start to see it, to name it, even to quantify it, gives us the ability to start working on things that we hadn't been able to work on before.
Yeah, it is fascinating. What also fascinates me about this, Jim, is I was saying to you just before we hit record that your take on relation, so to
Yeah.
speak, is and what you present in the book. What's so interesting to me about the book is that it's written as a narrative, so
Mm.
it's written as a story,
Mm.
but it's polymathematic in the way in
Yeah.
which you build all these different things. So we've talked about some of the philosophy through Buber,
Yeah.
but there's also science in there, there's art in there, there's all sorts. So tell us a little bit more about some of those other constructs that really play into this, because there's a wonderful integration into this, and it comes so
Yeah.
naturally, and it speaks to so many different disciplines. So tell us a little bit more about some of the key concepts that
Yeah, so
play
that
into
was
that.
part of my deep dive into this, Tom, is that, when I say that, we live in a relational universe, that's the fabric of existence. That means it applies everywhere in every realm, whether we're talking about art or science. In fact, it's probably the biggest, I'd say, discovery in science from my point of view in the last century is exactly this point, that we're never observing something separate from ourselves. We're observing our interactions with whatever it is we're measuring. All we're ever seeing is relation. Never seeing anything outside of relation. So I have I mean, I read a book years ago when I was an undergraduate. It was my first book I ever read on quantum physics. And it was called The Dancing Wu Li Masters. And it wasn't a physicist who wrote it. It was sort of a popular writer, I'd say. But it was I'm like, it just blew my mind. It was so interesting. And so ever since then, I've kind of had a side gig as a very amateur sort of quantum physics, sort of geekish, geek out on it, because when you really dive deep into quantum theory, it ends up you loop right it back into philosophy. You're right on the questions of the meaning of life, what's really going on, and that lights my soul on fire. All of that. So, I've done a lot of study on the quantum side of physics, some on the biological side as well, not as much, although I do get into, in you and we, I also get into a fascinating body of work by a paleontologist named Pierre Teilhard Desjardins, who in his study of evolution showed how all progress from the very, bits of sort of separate bits of matter lying around to organic life forming and more complex forms of organic life forming to all the way up through human thought and even the creation of the internet. I mean, this is all stuff that he foresaw in the case of the latter case. But it all happens through this relational interplay of three steps. And the first of them is that in order for any progress to happen, and this has huge implication on every aspect of life, not just for bits of matter. I mean, think about it in business for a moment. So here's his point. He says, if you're going to progress, you have to have different things that are different that actually bump up against each other. Because if they never bump up against each other, they just stay what they are, right? They just that's what it is. But if you have these different bits bumping up against each other, and he calls that compression, and then some of those then actually converge, so they hold on to each other in their differences. You have out of this bond, this convergent bond, the emergence of entirely new levels of development. So I use, for example, you'll remember in the book, one of the metaphors in part one of the book I talk about, when I introduce one of the four laws of relation through the metaphor of water, because a water molecule is an example of Teilhard's point, that you have oxygen and hydrogen, different things, and they can be different things. That's fine. The world needs both of them. Um, but if you get the two coming together and they hold on to each other while retaining their difference, then out of the tension of that bond, this convergence, you get the emergence of water. And that's essentially what we always have the opportunity to do. And all human progress, all progress of any kind, from Teilhard's point of view of his work, it comes out through that process. So here in the United States, for example, this is massive from my point of view socially, because what's happening in our country is metaphorically, it's like you've got hydrogen atoms looking at the oxygen atom and saying, you guys are nuts. You need to be hydrogen. You need to think like hydrogen. And the oxygen folks are looking at the hydrogen people. You're off your rockers. You need to view things our ways. And so everyone's sort of decrying the differences they're seeing across the gaps and thinking that the answer is to merge them into ourselves, overcome them, or obliterate them if we need to. So all that's left is people like ourselves, which is the sure way never to make water. In all progress, including human progress, the only ways we get to the better places that still lie out there as possibilities for us is if we don't bail out in that um, um, cheap, weak, non-courageous kind of way, but rather, no, we're going to hold on to each other while we can have our differences, but while we're holding on to this different, holding on to our different, we'll hold on to each other. And that out of that, since no one person's got all the answers, no one perspective has everything. You have the possibility of now the emergence of entirely new things. So we can't get there alone. So
Mm.
that for me is a really powerful application of Teilhard's points. It's relational at its core. I also quoted Teilhard at the beginning of the book too, along with Buber, um, about that point
Yeah,
that we progress by uniting. I mean, that's the only way the progression happens. And
yeah,
specifically, we progress by differences uniting. All right. Now that fights against another reality. Another human reality is homophily, which is our proclivity to just gather with people like ourselves. It's the comfortable thing to do. So we all do it. It's not wrong. It's not bad. And holding on to each other and giving each other support, even people like ourselves, that's beautiful. That can be a very beautiful thing. But if that's all we do, and then you just get bunches of people like themselves holding on to each other, but not compressing, converging, and emerging across the divides, you just end up with a balkanized reality. It's still relational. It's just relation in a very separatist kind of way, as against one another, instead of with one another.
yeah.
And that creates a different future.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're talking there, it just made me think of Abraham Lincoln actually, and
Mm,
particularly the title of that biography that I think it was
yeah.
Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote,
Yep.
Team of Rivals. It made me
Brilliant
think
book.
of that. Just the concept of having a team of rivals. I mean, that would be anathema to some people. The idea that I can work with rivals to move forward, knowing that actually
Yeah.
their perception, their values in some respects are different to mine, or maybe they're not that different. Maybe we've just got different values hierarchies and we've just got different priorities. But
Right.
having an actual team of, that it's possible for these opposites and these different things to work together to compound to form something that is greater than the sum of its parts. Just the very possibility of that seems remote in the minds of many at the moment, doesn't it? In terms of
It
how
does.
people are looking at each other.
It does. But I actually believe, I think this is true anywhere. I just am feeling it really heavily here in the States, given the current realities and climate here, is that the next person, and I know there's a lot of structural issues that are fighting against this, the way the structures have developed, but the next leader who actually will revert back to the Lincolnian, that approach to reach across the aisle and pull together cabinets, for example, from all across parties, across perspectives, and really truly do that and abandon there's sort of this line here that's been popularized by leaders from both parties, which is elections have consequences, which it means therefore we're in charge and we're going to do what we want, which is sort of an abandonment of all the other people in the country who actually see things a bit differently. Um, and in a world here in the States where the electoral margins are actually so tiny, there are no mandates in modern U.S. sort of politics. It's just thin slices of victory to sort of shut off the concerns, the viewpoints, the perspectives of almost half of well, more than I mean, most people don't even vote. So when you lump them all in, um, you got masses that are not being represented. So I think, and there have been moments in our history where there have been politicians who had this opportunity and they didn't do it, and I think that it was a real loss where they actually could have built these coalitions across the divides. I think it would blow up American politics in the sense that whoever actually pulls that off totally changes the game. And I mean, in a massively, even structural way. And yeah, so yeah, I, I'm hoping, and it might be that things get difficult enough that enough people start thinking there needs to be a better way that makes that sort of thing possible. But that's true not only in politics. I mean, you see this in business too. I mean, the new folks come in, new leader comes in, and they just jettison even all the good things that are going on because they've got to put their own quote unquote stamp and reinvent things. And it's just you see the same hydrogen versus oxygen approach all over the place instead of hydrogen and oxygen approach. And how are we going to do that together? Which, in my experience, is in almost every case way better, way more successful.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that there is that sort of my way or the highway sort of approach when
Yeah.
a new regime comes in, whether, like you say, whether it's in politics or whether it's in business. I've seen it in both contexts. How do you go about convincing someone that it is better to make water rather than to keep the elements separate? What sort of evidence do you adduce to really convince people and win hearts and minds in that domain?
Well, I think that we all have that evidence in our own lives. Maybe not, we're not currently thinking of that evidence when we're in the middle of a hot battle where we're trying to subdue some other viewpoint. But if we just consider our own life experience and when have we grown the most, when have been the parts of life that have been most productive and most wonderful? I think more often than not, those are going to be times when there's been more water making and less, warmongering interpersonally. So I think everyone has that. We all have that innate understanding that's not just theoretical, it's experiential because our own lives. In fact, look, our own physical lives are the result of this. I mean, every person, you and me, everyone is essentially water in the sense that we're both the emergent offspring of differences coming together. I mean, we are physical manifestations of this very principle. And psychological developments, social developments, they all happen in the same pattern. And when you can start to see that, it's like, oh, a lot of things actually start to fit and make sense, and you can see it all over the place. Hegel's work about history, was he was making some related points here too about history develops in this relational pattern through time. And so yeah, I think so. Partly I wrote You and We, and partly I wrote it as a story in order to answer that very question. How can you help people to be able to see? Well, here we have a story where I think most people they'll encounter characters in the story where they feel it. I mean, I'm in that character in one way, or in this one and that one, and their own developments in the story when they're learning these ideas too, but not just learning the ideas, they're actually in the story, you have the ideas being applied. I mean, you see it, you feel it, and it feels real because they're applied in the very ways I've applied them in my own life. We've all applied them in our own lives, so it rings true. So that's partly, why I chose that form of the book was that it wasn't just a cognitive experience only. I'm not just sort of sharing information. It's sort of a whole soul experience, I think, reading a book like this. And you come out the other side and it's like, oh, okay. I mean, I see and feel things
Mm.
differently now, you know?
Yeah, and that's what I particularly appreciate about the book, and that's what I think the genius of the book is the fact that not only have you taken this, as I say, polymathematic approach where you've got you've got the philosophy, you've got the science, you've got the art, and all these things blended together, even with a bit of Sinatra thrown in as well.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so you synthesize all those things, but you've done it in the context of a narrative that's very readable, it's very engaging,
Yeah.
and I say relatable because I agree in terms of my own reading of it. I can see myself in each of the different characters, and you can
Mm.
see why they would do certain things. So
Mm.
to the other people or the other characters in the book, one of the characters might have been a bad guy or whatever. but you can see why the bad guy might have behaved like a bad guy
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
relation to other things that are going on. So it's like this big it's almost like a big map, isn't it?
Mm.
It's a big picture that only certain people have part of the perspective of. So
Yeah,
so
it's true.
obviously you understand your own perspective, but
Yeah.
well, for the most part you should do anyway if you clued on to what's happening in your life and you're awake. But you certainly don't see what's happening in everybody else's. You only
Right.
see you only see or you only react to how other people are with you, and more specifically how that makes you feel. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? That because people tend
Yeah.
to feel we tend to feel before we think, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the research bears that out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So,
That's right.
so this is interesting. But one question I've got about these elements, I can't resist asking this question about the elements
Yeah.
themselves because we think about we think about making water, hydrogen and oxygen, and we think
Yeah.
these are pure elements. But human
Mm.
beings are not pure elements. So where does individual develop without being individualistic about it? How does individual development and improvement play into this then?
Yeah. So yeah, that really kind of goes to a question that I get asked a lot too, which about what about the self, right? I mean, can I work on myself? And of course, the answer is yes. We work on ourselves, but but the thing to realize, and the thing that helps us work on ourselves more effectively is, I'm not working on a separate self. I'm working on a relational self, a self that's in relation, fundamentally. It's inescapable. There is no separate me. I mean, I show up in different ways with different people. I have the capacity to be in very different kinds of people. In fact, my wife and I joke quite often because we travel a lot, and there's someone we call Airport Jim, which is to say I'm a different person in the airport than I am out of the airport in certain ways, right? And even once I get on the plane and my luggage is all stored and I'm seated there, I'm a bit different than I was when I was in the terminal. So these different relational contexts call out sort of different forms of ourselves, right? So working on ourselves, I think, is really important, really helpful thing. In fact, I'm reading a really fascinating book now called The Pursuit of Happiness, which is really a dive into a lot of the founding figures, both well known and not well known at all in the American founding. And this line in the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson penned, The Pursuit of Happiness. Well, that wasn't his idea. I mean, he got that from Cicero and others, all these thinkers through the centuries, and they were all reading these. I mean, most of them were reading basically the same sources. There was sort of a ground truth that they were standing on and they were arguing within. But one of the things about that, this idea of pursuit of happiness is it's not the way we think of happiness today. It really was the pursuit, the active, practical pursuit of building personal virtues like integrity, humility. Famously, we have Franklin had what, 12 or 13 of those. He was where he kept a grid every day. How did he do on these different virtues? And many of these people were doing that. Well, I think that's wonderful. I mean, that's what we should be doing. It's just that even when you think about those virtues, integrity, humility, those aren't separate virtues. Those are all in relation with others. And I can show up, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's so much I could say about that. So now there's another related point that I think can get a little bit confusing about relation itself. Because some people think, and this is a popular way to talk now, what about my relationship with myself? Okay. There's relationships with others. What about my relationship with myself? Well, one of the points that Buber makes is that in order to have relation, you actually have to have difference. If there's no difference, it's like a dot. A dot doesn't have any, it's just a dot. You need two dots, you need distance, you need space, and now you're in relation. So we're not, I would say, we don't have a relationship with ourself in the way we have with others because we're not different. It's me, but it's a relational me. Okay. And I think we can, and a lot of psychological work is this kind of work where we actually can sort of form divisions within ourselves. We can kind of separate. We can have separations in ourselves. And I think a lot of psychologies and their various ways are about how do you stitch those separations back together into a whole. So I get that. So I think it can feel like at times I'm even fragmented against myself. And I do. So I understand why people would talk about have a relationship with myself. But I think Buber would say that's a different thing than a relationship with others outside of me. Because it's me. But it's a relational me. It's not a separate me. And so to a lot of our work, with leadership, when we get in organizations, there's such power when leaders start to see, oh my word, when you're helping a sales department, for example, or a marketing team, or the operations group, or the executive team, um, the most powerful, helpful work is when you're helping them in relation with all the other parts of the organization. That's because that's the reality. None of them, there is no corporation with only one of those parts. I mean, those are all manifestations of this organization that has these various needs and puts us in relation in various ways. But that's not the way people normally think of business. So instead of, so normally what people will do is, if you're going to do improvement, it's like we're going to work on individual leaders, one by one by one by one. We're going to work on individual departments, and that's fine. But the most powerful work is, in addition to that, if you're like, yeah, let's point our finger right at this space between all of this. You think of the org chart, you have all the parts and people on the org chart, but all the space on the org chart is where it all happens, because that's where we all mix and mingle and interact, and everything's produced in the space. And the org chart doesn't name the space. It's not paying attention to the space. It's the most important part of the chart. So, part of what we do, and in fact, in You and We, you'll remember in part 2 of the book, I get into relational mapping. That's one of the ways. We have others too, but that's one of the ways that we help illuminate the space. The space is what's basically everything's produced in the space. It's generative. It's this relational field across any social structure. And when you can start to see it, which is hard to see in cases where most work is sort of mental work now, and so it's hard to see the space. You can see the space in like athletic endeavors. You can see it out in a, you've got a football match happening. You can see relation. You can see connectivity on the pitch or not. You can see it. In companies, you can't normally see it. I mean, people are sitting at their desks and they're on the phone. But so we help people to see it. We name it, illuminate it, score it even, so you can see, is this good enough? Is this level of connectivity, is this level of relation, is this what we need, or does it need to be higher? And what would happen if we increase the value of that relational field across the whole system? What would happen to everything? It's enormous. So those are new conversations that have never been had, I would think, because people really haven't had a lens to have them through.
Yes.
That's mixing some metaphors, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's the framing of things makes such a huge difference to
Yeah.
the direction of travel, doesn't it? And I'm glad you mentioned the relational map. I mean, I think this is so interesting, so valuable to have a relational map. I'm just taking a peek of it now as you talk, but I
Yeah.
love how it is basically where people can rate their relationships with other people in the organization. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah.
And it
Well,
goes
that's,
from yeah
yep. Mhm. And
from
that's,
yeah.
oh, go ahead. I'm
No,
sorry.
no,
You
no,
could say
no.
more. Yeah.
You'll say it better than me. I was just trying to
Okay.
summarize. 'Cause it kind of goes from -2, which is division, and up to +2, which is compounding, which is positive. So it goes from negative to positive. But
Right.
but addition, where we're kind of adding to each other, is actually 0, which I find really interesting, because that's kind of like almost like homeostasis, isn't it? Where things are just kind
Yeah.
of ticking over.
Right. Yeah.
Rather
So those are
than
those are the levels of relation. So in order to map any relational field, any social structure, whether it's in a company, in a family, in a neighborhood, in a community, in a country, which, by the way, one of my dreams is to equip the world to relationally map itself, to give the world the tools to do this. Every town, every village, every community, every state, every nation, between nations, it's a view on us, on human beings that we've not had before. And so we've developed technology to do that. And we want to put that in people's hands and get people going on it. But in order to do it, um, we talk about these different levels of relation or different levels of connectivity that we can have been operating at between people. So you just named these are mathematical operators is the what I use. So the lowest is what I call division, and that's where we're obstructing each other. We're making things harder for one another. And when you say that, we've all been in relationships where that's sort of what's going on is an obstruction level or division level relationship. The next level up is subtraction. So now we're not obstructing each other anymore, but we're resisting each other. So, that might mean I ignore you. I ignore your suggestions. It might mean I work around you. It might mean I roll my eyes at any suggestion you make. I mean, in that inside of that kind of relationship, that's also negative. That scores at -1. And as you mentioned, addition is 0. And why addition is 0 is it's that if let's say we're a two-person company. So I bring myself, I bring my part, that's 1, you bring your part, that's 1. And we come together and we just hunker down and do each of our parts. Well, then we get 1 + 1. We don't get any lift beyond each of us bringing our parts. And that's, so we end up with, in that case, we end up with 2, but our relational lift is 0. We just brought ourselves. The next level up is, and so that in, so a word I use for that is we coexist when we're at the addition level of the relationship. And, that's a place where relationships can be in for years, where you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing. I mean, there are a whole bunch of marriages in this world where they're the addition level, just allowing each other to do their own things. And that's how they're getting on best somehow, right? And in a business, it's very common, the addition level. And that's what's at the heart of siloing in companies, because you this isn't only between individuals, it's also between teams and groups. So you can relationally map not just individuals on a team. We do this with clients always. We relationally map the enterprise. So this department and this department with each of the other departments, and all the departments do that, and you end up with this grid, this map that shows you the white space of your org chart. You see what's happening in the between, right? In the space. And it's a shocking thing to see. In fact, the very first time I ever did this, I actually, and this is a relational point itself, I had never done it before. I'd never thought of doing it before until I was with an executive team of a company that basically everyone in the world would know. I'm not going to name it, but I was with that team, 15 people or so, and I just had them each sort of score from their own perspective there. We did it twice. First, them between each of the other people on the team, those relationships. And by the way, you're not scoring the other person. You're not scoring yourself because it's not individualistic. We're scoring the space between us. What's the relation like? That's important. And then I had them score, okay, you're leading the operations department. So your view of the operations department work relation with each of the other departments. So I had them score them themselves. But then I thought, well, what if we actually put that all together? And that came basically out of the discussion we'd had on the things they were seeing and their thing. This was a relational emergence, essentially, of this thing that I now call a relational map. It came in the context of the relational exchange with that particular executive team. And they said, yes. So we wheeled in this massive one of those big whiteboards, and they both got up there and wrote their row for their department, for example, and how they saw the relational sort of with each of the others, scoring from -2 to 2. And it was amazing to see that and the discussions that were then able to be had. And then when we were finished, the CEO wheeled that whiteboard into his office, put it right next to his desk. He says, I've got to be looking at this all the time because this is how we're going to move this company. Because I don't have to, it's not like bits and pieces, this little part, that little part. It's like, no, I see the interactions, and some of those interactions are more important than others, strategically speaking.
Yes.
So you might be okay in a company, this department and that department, it might be okay to be operating at the addition level because they don't touch very much. But there might be somewhere, no, we've got to be at the highest level, which we call compounding. So the one beyond addition is multiplication. That's +1. That's where we're collaborating, cooperating. Compounding now is we're deeply integrating. The walls come down. We're really integrating across divides. We have a deeper understanding of what's going on across the system and how we're affecting other parts and vice versa.
Yeah.
And that's a +2. So as a leader, you might think these these relational nodes in our or between teams, these have to be operating at a +2 if we're really going to be doing our best work.
Mm.
These are okay at a +1. At a multiplication, it'd be good if we can get there. These over here are 0. It's hard to. I haven't come across a case yet where there's a good argument for being in the negative is helpful for the organization. So in every case I've ever encountered, all leaders will say if they're at a division level somewhere or subtraction, they've got to raise that, got to get at least to addition. But the world is, there are billions and billions of dollars being spent by businesses trying to get their people to what, I think of as the multiplication level. But the biggest thing of all is to get beyond that to compounding. That's the big, and that
Yeah.
really Buber's work unlocks that. I think it's the best work out there unlocking that. That's why I get into his work in part 3 of the book as I do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I was going to pick this up actually, Jim. I think it's brilliant how you make the distinction between collaborate and integrate. Loads of people talk about collaboration. I've
Yeah.
talked about collaboration loads. Like, let's collaborate, work together. And we talk, you can even talk about synergy as well, and the whole being great in the sum of its parts. That's great, and conceptually that relates to all of this as well. But integrating and compounding, that's another level. I think that's another level of synergy. And I think this sort of tool that you're talking about is extremely valuable for anybody at a director level, because that's
Yeah.
essentially that's their job, isn't it? To make sure that all of these parts are working well together. I also love as well, something else to pick out is how people are rating the space between each other,
Yep.
right? That they're rating the space between. So there's no attack here, right? It's not like I'm saying,
Right.
oh, well, you're a terrible person, so I'm going to give you a -2. It's actually the space between us right now is a -2. And this is something that comes out really clearly in the book, in the narrative. And I love it because it could be really easy to, in relation to a certain character, you could say, well, he's obviously the guy who needs to sort everything out. But you make it very clear in the narrative between the characters that no, 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 we need to sort it out. We need to
Yeah.
sort this out. And so I think it's a very non-judgmental, accessible way
Yeah.
of dealing with this. I just wonder, just to probe on that a bit as
Mhm.
well, Jim. What if you are at a -2 with someone? What if trust has been broken, for example, and you think, well, actually, this person's character's in question, and I'm not sure. How do you restore that? How do you then work through the gears to get from the -2 into more positive territory?
Yeah. Well, you might remember in the book, there's the part where I get into four-dimensional thinking. Because in a relationship, for example, let's say the situation, Tom, that you just raised is between the two of us. Let's say that this is at a -2 level. Well, so what's all involved in that? I mean, I'm in that, you're in that. There are other things in that as well that are actually beyond the two of us. There might be like in an organ, let's say we work together. It might be that the structures of the organization or the systems and processes of the organization or the incentives in the organization in one ways are pitting us against each other, for example. And that has an impact on us. It actually invites us to go certain kinds of ways that actually are difficult for the other person. Um, and so that's having an impact as well. The level of sort of community across a place, like do we have a community sort of way of being in an organization together that allows us to sort of meet and mingle and get over things, or are we so atomized and all these things that we're sort of being pitted against each other a lot? So in organizational space, we're utilizing all of those levers. So with leaders, so it's like part of the answer is my own attitudes that I bring into this relationship. Part of the answer is my own behaviors that I bring into the relationship. Part of it is other parts of the system that are affecting the relationship, other parts of the community that are, and that gives you kind of a larger canvas to think about. But here's the way it goes down when we work with people. So let's I want to think organizationally first, then we'll go to personal life. So in an organization, the way this goes down is, let's say we're working on a team and we do a team map together. So let's say we've done the enterprise level map, so we've got all that. But now we're both members of the executive team, and we're now going to do an executive team relational map or connectivity map. And let's say it comes down that one of us rates it at -2, our relational intersection, and one of us rates it at a -1 or whatever. Okay. Well, so at that point, The question is that is that good enough for the business? I mean, from a strategic perspective, is that are we okay with that? And I think both of us in that case would say, actually, no, that's not good enough. So then that sets up a conversation. So, okay, let's think about it. First of all, we're actually viewing the situation even a little bit differently because I'm viewing it as a -2, you're viewing it as -1. So let's even talk about the difference in perception. Why do you see it that way versus this way? And we can talk about that. But the fact that we're talking about this thing that's in the middle here, instead of me talking about you or you talking about me, is a total game changer. I mean, my earlier career, um, at Arbinger, that first book, Leadership and Self-Deception. I mean, that book and the work was crafted very carefully because we were tackling the problem of self-deception. It was a very sort of individualistically sort of constructed rendition of the problem, which is I have the problem of not knowing that I have a problem. So if you're going to tackle that, you have to tackle that in a way that gently invites people to sort of open up themselves to the possibility, wait a second, maybe I've got some issues here. And you've got to be skilled when you're doing that because that can go terribly wrong. Okay. What I've discovered thinking relationally now and helping people to work relationally through this body of work with you now is it doesn't have the same kind of traps because I'm going to resist you pointing at me and saying I'm a problem, but I don't resist in the same way us pointing at the middle and saying, I think it feels like this, even though I'm involved in that. I get that I'm involved in that. Well, I'm not talking about me. I'm not talking about you. We're both involved in it. And so then the question is, so what are we going to do about it? So I think in business business case is a little simpler than like a home situation in the sense that I just said that um, is it good enough for the business that we're going to be at -1 or -2? I think both of us, I've never come across a case yet where people say, yeah, we're good with that. They'll say, actually, no, that's not going to work. So maybe we start by what would it take to get to addition? Can we get to 0? That's where forget 2 right now, forget compounding. Let's start by what would a move to addition look like? What would be our plan? And then you can think, what might need to happen sort of what would it be helpful behaviorally for me to be doing differently? What attitudinally maybe what need could be helpful if it was changed? But are there other things? Are there systemic things that are sort of keeping us divided here? Do we have any authority to change any of those? Is there anything that could be tweaked there? Are there, and so you can lay out kind of a 4-dimensional canvas of how we can tackle this project. And now you've named the space, you've scored it, you've both said, here's our goal. We want to get to a 0, like by maybe, next quarter. Here's what we're going to do to tackle that. Now you're working on something together. It's a totally different thing. Now,
Yeah.
it can be trickier at home because although you can say, is this good enough for the family if we're -1? It's not just a purely sort of economic thing at home. There's all kinds of deep, intertwined, emotional heartaches there can be in that sort of a thing. Um, but even so, at principle, it's still the same thing. If we can be talking about the between space rather than sort of pointing at you or pointing at me, you get way out ahead because most things in the home front get stuck because people feel like they're being pointed at and accused, and
Yeah.
the other party feels like that's being unjustly done. And so if you take a relational view on it, that's not where you just don't start there. You don't go there.
No.
We're talking about the thing between us. And then now we'll each then think about ourselves in that relation, in the context of
Mm.
that relation. Fair enough. But that's not about, I've got a problem. It's like, yeah, we're in this marriage together, for example. Do we want another 30 years of -2?
Mm.
Neither of us wants that. So what would be possible? I mean, maybe if we went up one level, what would that look? I mean, maybe it's go up 3 levels too big of a jump, but maybe the next level, what changes maybe can help us get there? And now you have a project you're working on together.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Yeah, the idea
Yeah.
again that it's not pointing fingers at the other person. It's you're both looking at the space in between,
Yeah.
and that inherently, I mean, the beauty of it is that inherently invites at least collaboration, at least some sort of cooperation, right? If you're both
Yeah.
trying to look at the same thing. And I think this is a challenge that we have in the world at large is that we need to ensure that we're looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
times there are different interpretations of facts. There are falsehoods, there are different interpretations. It's like we have to define what is the thing. So being able to define the relationship as the thing is a very good start in terms of working
Mm,
together, isn't it? That in itself means that at least we're not on opposite sides of the table, so to speak. We're on the
right.
same side of the table, and we're looking at this thing together analytically, and
Yeah.
and thinking about how we can improve it. I think this is transformational. I really do. I think even the framing of it is inherently transformational because
Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
it shifts
You know,
everything.
yeah. But let's take your question down one more level, Tom, because let's say we're in a relationship and I'm the other party doesn't want to work on it together. Then what? Okay. Even like we want to point at the middle. Yeah, they're not interested. They still want to point at me. Well, so I was interviewed on a TV show here in Washington D.C. a couple months ago, and the last question, it was only like a 5 or 6 minute interview, but the interviewer, the last question they asked was that question: what happens if you're willing but the other party isn't willing? And I actually blew that answer. I gave the wrong answer to that question. And it wasn't that my answer was mistaken. It's that in fact, it's the kind of answer that I've given for 30 years. And there's truth in it, but the deepest truth isn't in it. And there's a misunderstanding in the answer that when you multiply that misunderstanding across a population, it can have devastating consequences. So I'm going to tell you what I said, which is basically what I would have said 10 years ago, for example, with great confidence. Um, and then I'm going to tell you what I think is wrong with the answer, and it speaks to this issue we're talking about. So she asks again. So does this work if you're willing to change, but the other person doesn't change? Well, my answer was, well, it depends what you mean by works. I mean, certainly it's better if both people change than if one person does. Okay. But it's going to take somebody to change, or no one's going to change, right? It's that kind of answer. And that's true. That's true as far as it goes. But here's the problem with it. The question was already set up individualistically. And I, even though I should have known better by now, I sort of was sucked into and I gave an individualistic answer in response. Because think about the question: what happens if you're willing, but someone else isn't? I've already split the world apart into these separates. Okay. Um, and when the fact of the matter is, when you understand relationality, you remember we're all mingling in the space between. It's all, and we all are partaking of it and adding to it. It's not that we have all these separate bits, or it's that no, we're all part of this sort of manifestations out of this human relational experience, relational field, if you will, to think sort of in terms of physics metaphors. And so the truth of the matter is, and what I should have said was, you know, even if quote unquote one person changes, that changes the space and that changes everything. It's not like I'm held hostage by other people. It's not like the project of life is, I need that other person to change, so I'm going to change so that they do. And so this is my gambit. Okay, I'm going to try to change. I'm going to see if that's going to have the influence I wanted to have. No, actually, any change in any party or in any part of the system that's having an effect on the party changes the space in which we both exist. And that changes everything. Um, and that to me is a better answer. And in a way, it's a more hopeful answer too, because I'm not being held hostage by anything.
Yes.
And I'm also have escaped this individualistic trap and presumption,
Mhm.
um, where I've already, without realizing it, imported the lines that are dividing the world into the way I'm seeing the world. I mean, the problem is already in the setup, and when you turn the dial, you see, well, actually, there's something different going on here. You know?
Yeah. I find it really empowering as well because, like you say, you're not being held hostage to somebody else changing or not changing. but it
Yeah.
means that you can do that same analysis. So you can look at
Mm.
your behavior, your attitudes that affect the space between, and you can crack on and get to work,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
exactly right.
I think
Yeah.
that's really empowering in and of itself. The fact that you don't have to wait on somebody else. You don't have to use them as an excuse, whether
Yeah.
they do or don't make any change. You can change and then see what happens. And that's the magic of it because
Yes.
that changes everything. Like going back to the science and the kind of the alchemy of it or the compounding effect of it. You've changed your nature, right? You've gone from, I don't know, you've gone from a hydrogen to a whatever. I was going to say potassium, but that's quite volatile, so maybe not. But maybe you've gone from a potassium to a hydrogen. I don't know. But that's exactly right in terms of you can just be empowered to make the changes necessary or that you feel are necessary because again this relies on acting in good conscience, in good faith. And again, like you say about those values like integrity and self-awareness, those things are absolutely paramount as well. But it's doing that and then seeing how that changes the space in between. And that's really where the magic happens, isn't it?
Exactly.
And
It's exactly right.
yeah,
Yeah.
the possibilities are endless. So this has been a really, really fascinating conversation, Jim. I've thoroughly
Mm.
enjoyed it as I thoroughly enjoyed going through the book. I've got to say, I did say to you before we hit record again that this was one of the more challenging episodes to prepare for, just because
Mm.
the book is so conceptually rich while also
Mm.
having such an integrated narrative. I think it's very valuable for a lot of people. I'm not going to answer who I think it's for. Who would you recommend it for, just in closing off, Jim?
Oh, well, look, I mean, I think this isn't the marketing answer, right? I think it's for everyone. I mean, it's sort of a wake up call to something, a reality that none of us is seeing. The reality none of us is really thinking about has massive impact. If, in business terms, the people I mean, there's the business side, there's the personal side, and then there's the social side. And I care about all three of them. I mean, on the business side, this is really a book for any people in organizations who they're experiencing sort of breakdowns in connectivity across the system. It might be complex organizations where, I mean, the divides are real, the silos are real. It might be organizations that are on a growth path and they've lost that sort of intimate, informal relationality that sort of characterized the business early on, and that's going and they're regretting it. It's like, this isn't the place it used to be. How do we recover that? It's for that. How do you actually build connectivity across the system? And then it's for anyone who's concerned about what's happening societally, um, who's worried about how we're splintering from each other and what that might mean for the future, and wants to see, is there actually a way of viewing both the problem and therefore that's different maybe than we've been seeing it before, that then would illuminate new pathways forward that might give me more hope? Then I think it's for those people too.
There is something towards the end of the book which I think is really fantastic as well
Mm.
about how future growth is dependent on the next we, and this idea
Yeah.
that we focus on the next we. So we move obviously beyond ourselves, we move beyond our immediate families, we move beyond our friends, we move beyond the people that think like us, to people who don't think like us, to people who don't even like us, to people who
Yeah.
might be in opposition to us. And that's where the growth lies. And that
Yeah.
pathway, and I think it's mentioned quite subtly in the book, but I think that pathway is incredibly empowering, and it does give us some vision for the future with where we are right now, writ large, and also maybe at more micro levels as well. That gives us a pathway for the future. So thank you
Agreed.
so much for that,
Yeah.
Jim. Thank you
Sure.
for the time today on the Real Clear Values podcast.
Fun conversation. Yeah. Thanks for reading You and We so deeply, Tom. That was fun. It made for a rich discussion.